The night Staff Sergeant Cole Dryden was pulled from the wreckage of his vehicle on Route 9. He had roughly 4 minutes before the internal bleeding finished what the ambush had started. The responding paramedics got to him first, and they were good at their jobs, but what they found when they cut his door open was the kind of damage that makes experienced hands hesitate. Femoral involvement, pressure dropping in real time, and a chest that wasn't moving the way a chest is supposed to move. They called it in hot. Riverton Memorial's trauma bay was already prepping when the ambulance bay doors opened. Most of the staff had been on for 11 hours. It was 2:17 in the morning, and the particular exhaustion of a long overnight shift had settled into the unit the way it always does. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low hum of worn-down people doing their jobs by reflex. The charge nurse that night was a man named Gerald, who had been doing this for 22 years, and still moved like he had something to prove. He started calling orders before the gurney was fully through the door. Monitors, blood, airway tray, get Webb on the phone. The nurse at the secondary station didn't wait for her name to be called. Her name was Mara Sutton. She had been working nights at Riverton Memorial for 3 years, and in that time, she had accumulated exactly 2 observations from her colleagues. She was good at her job and she was impossible to read. Not unfriendly. She would cover a shift without being asked, and she always knew where the extra 18-gauge IVs were when the supply cart ran short. But she didn't talk about herself, not about where she went to school, not about family, not about anything that existed. Before the year she walked into Riverton's HR office with her credentials and a letter of reference from a hospital in a city nobody could quite place. One of the residents had asked her once, casually, over coffee, where she had trained before nursing school. She had said, "Wherever they needed me," and changed the subject so smoothly that it took him 3 days to realize she hadn't actually answered. So when Staff Sergeant Dryden came through those doors, Mara Sutton was already on her feet. She assessed him the way a person assesses something they have seen before. Not the nervous scan of a nurse running through a checklist, but the fast, flat-eyed evaluation of someone who has already catalogued the variables before most people in the room have finished reading the monitor. Hemodynamic instabilities. The left side of his abdomen was rigid. His systolic was sitting at 74 and falling, which meant the bleeding was not slowing down on its own, which meant the next 4 minutes were going to decide everything. She called for O negative before the attending confirmed the order. Dr. Whitaker, the attending on call, a competent man with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to work without a fully stocked supply room, looked up from the chart he had just been handed and said, "Let's wait on type and cross." "He doesn't have time," Mara said. Not loudly. Not with any particular edge. Just a statement of fact delivered in a register that made the room recalibrate without fully understanding why. "His pressure is 70 and he's trending down. We wait on type and cross, we're coding him in 8 minutes. There was a half second where the room held. Dr. Whitaker looked at the monitor. He looked at Mara. He said, "Go ahead." She was already moving. What followed in the next 11 minutes was the kind of clinical precision that people in emergency medicines spend entire careers trying to develop, and most of them never fully reach. She ran 2 large-bore peripheral IVs without hesitation, positioned them correctly on the first attempt, and had a pressure bag running before the second unit of O negative was even spiked. She talked through what she was doing in a low constant voice. Not for the room, not for the attending, but for the second-year resident standing to her left, who looked like he was about to pass out from the weight of the situation. She gave him something to hold on to, a direction. A next step. That was a choice, and it was a deliberate one. And not one that most people in that room would have had the presence of mind to make. At one point Gerald, who had seen things in 22 years that most people never would, stopped moving for a moment and watched her. Just for a moment, then he went back to work. Dryden stabilized enough for surgery at 2:41 in the morning. The trauma surgeon who received him in the OR said afterward to no one in particular that whoever had managed his pre-op resuscitation had given him a real chance. He said it like a question wrapped in a compliment, and nobody in the hallway answered him. Mara Sutton charted her notes and returned to her station. She did not go to the waiting area. She did not check the board for updates. She did what she always did after a bad call. She refilled the supply cart, because it's always depleted after something like this, and then she sat at her station with a cup of coffee that was too cold to drink, and stared at a point on the wall slightly above her computer screen. 3 men had come in with Dryden. Not family. Not the kind of men who sat in chairs the way ordinary people sit in chairs. They wore civilian clothes that looked like they had been chosen in a hurry. And they held their stillness with a particular discipline that is difficult to describe to anyone who has never been around it, but immediately recognizable to anyone who has. They watched the trauma bay doors. They did not speak except once briefly in a register too low for the staff at the nurses' station to catch. The one closest to the door had been watching Mara since the moment she moved. His name was Chief Warrant Officer Ray Elband, and he had spent 14 years in a community where the ability to read people was not a soft skill but a survival one. He had worked alongside personnel from programs that didn't have public-facing names, and he had learned to recognize the particular shape of a certain kind of training. Not because anyone had told him what to look for, but because he had been around it enough times that his nervous system had developed its own filing system. He had watched Mara call for the blood, before the doctor confirmed. He had watched her position herself at the bedside, before anyone assigned her a role. He had watched the way she talked to the resident. Not with the breathless over-explanation of someone managing their own anxiety, but with the calm, deliberate information transfer of someone who had once, in another context, been responsible for keeping less experienced people functional under conditions far worse than this. He had watched all of that, and then when she reached across the gurney to adjust the pressure bag on the far side, her sleeve pulled back 2 inches, and he saw it on the inside of her right forearm, just above the wrist. Small, precise dark ink on pale skins. Not decorative. Not the kind of thing a person gets, because they like the way it looks, a specific mark. A number and a symbol together, rendered in a style that was not a style at all but a notation, the kind that exists in exactly one context, used by exactly one category of person, none of whom are supposed to talk about it. Ray Elband had seen that mark once before in his career, on a man whose name he was not permitted to say, in a debrief that had never been formally documented. He did not react. He looked at the floor. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, and his mind did what trained minds do. It ran the thread backward, cross-referencing, building the picture from the edges in a nurse at a regional trauma center working overnight, who moved like that and had that on her wrist. The math of it was not complicated, but the implications were the kind that made his chest go tight. In a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the specific weight of encountering something above your clairvoyance level in the middle of an ordinary night. He looked at the teammate sitting across the room. The man's name was First Sergeant Paul Grint, and he had been watching Elband watching the nurse. Grint raised his eyebrows a fraction of a centimeter. Elband gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet, not here. At 4 a.m, the surgeon came out and told them Dryden was out of the OR and in recovery. Critical but stable. He used the word fortunate twice, which is not a word surgeons use casually. Grint exhaled slowly and put his head back against the wall. Elband did not relax. He pulled out his phone. Not a personal device, a secondary phone. The kind carried in addition to personal devices by people who sometimes need to make contact through channels that are not logged on standard carrier records. He typed a message into a thread that had been dormant for 7 months. He did not type a name. He described, Regional Trauma Center, overnight nurse, female, right forearm, inner wrist, the mark, the notation, the number. He wrote, "Tell me I'm wrong." The reply came in 31 minutes. It was from a contact he had met exactly once, in person, in a conference room that officially wasn't being used, at a facility that officially didn't run the kind of meetings they were having. The contact had a rank that Elband was not cleared to know but had intuited from context. The reply said, "You're not wrong, she is not a subject of inquiry. She is a protected asset, status voluntary separation, terms classified. Do not approach, do not acknowledge, do not record this conversation." Then, after a pause that Elband could feel in the timestamp, "How is she?" He stared at that last line for a long time. He typed back, "Saved my sergeant's life tonight." The reply came in 4 seconds. Of course she did. Then the thread went dormant again. Elband put the phone in his jacket pocket and sat with the weight of what he knew, which was not very much and was simultaneously more than almost anyone in this hospital would ever understand. He thought about the 11 minutes. He thought about the blood call she had made before the doctor confirmed it. He thought about the way she had talked to the resident. giving him a handhold in the dark, the way people who have led others in bad situations learn to do, because they have seen what happens when you don't. He thought about the mark on her wrist. He thought about the man he had seen it on before. He thought about that debrief that had never been formally documented, and the things that had been said in it quietly between people who were trying to find words for something that the official language of their profession did not have words for. Shift change started. At 6, Mara Sutton came through the unit to hand off her patients. She moved the way she always moved. Efficiently, without theatrics, carrying her bag on one shoulder, and holding a clipboard she didn't strictly need but kept anyway. The way people keep small anchors, when they have learned that ordinary objects can hold you in ordinary life when other things conspire to make you feel you don't belong there. She passed the waiting area without looking at the men in it. Elban stood up. She stopped. It was not a dramatic stop. It was the stop of someone who has trained their body not to react, and whose body has just caught information that the brain hasn't fully processed yet. A fraction of a second. A recalibration so small that most people would not have seen it. "El's not mouse people," he said. "Staff Sergeant Dryden is in recovery. They're saying he's going to make it." Mara looked at him. Her expression was the expression of someone doing very precise arithmetic behind a very still face. She said, "I'm glad to hear it." Elban nodded. He let 2 seconds pass. Then he said quietly, not looking at her wrist, not gesturing, not indicating it in any way that a nearby observer would have caught. "I sent a message to a mutual contact. He told me to pass along his regard. He said the commitment doesn't expire." The stillness that moved through Mara Sutton in that moment was not the stillness of someone who has been caught. It was something older than that. Something that lived in a place underneath trained responses and professional composure. A place where the things you gave up in exchange for the life you chose are stored. Not with bitterness, because bitterness requires an audience. But with the particular quietness of someone who made a decision a long time ago and has been living inside it ever since without anyone on the outside ever knowing what the decision cost. She looked at him, not the way a nurse looks at a patient's family member, not the way a woman looks at a stranger, the way someone looks at a person who is standing in the doorway of a room they have not opened in years. She said, "Tell him the commitment was mutual, and tell him I'm fine. I've been fine." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I've been exactly where I'm supposed to be." She walked toward the exit. The morning light was coming through the lobby's east-facing windows. That particular early light that is more silver than gold. The kind that doesn't flatter anything, but makes everything look exactly as it is. It fell across the floor in long strips, and when Mara pushed the glass door open and stepped through it, the light caught the inside of her right forearm for a moment. The mark, precise, dark, rendered in a hand that knew what it was making. Then the door swung closed and she was gone. Elban stood in the lobby for a moment without moving. Behind him, Grint had walked up and was standing at his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a while, the way people don't say things, when the thing that has just happened is of a kind that words make smaller. Finally Grint said, "Who is she?" Elban thought about the reply from the dormant thread. He thought about the man in the debrief that had never been documented. He thought about 11 minutes in a trauma bay, at 2:17 in the morning, and a call for O-negative blood, before the attending confirmed it, and a second-year resident who would go home that night, not knowing that the calm in that room had been manufactured for him, deliberately, by someone who understood that keeping inexperienced people functional in the dark is its own kind of mission. He said, someone who did what was asked of her, and then did it again anyway, in a different room, in a different life without being asked at all. Grint was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does Dryden know?" "No," Elban said. "Should he?" Elban picked up his jacket from the chair. He looked at the door where Mara Sutton had gone out into the morning. "He knows he made it," Elban said. "That's what she would want him to know." They left the hospital as the first full light of the day came across the parking lot. It was the kind of morning that feels like a reset. Clean air, long shadows, the particular quiet that exists between the end of a night and the beginning of a day. The kind of morning that most people drive through without thinking about it. Somewhere on the other side of the parking lot, a car started. A white sedan, 4-door, nothing remarkable about it. It pulled out of the lot and turned south. Elban watched it go. There are people in this world who serve at a cost that never appears in any official accounting, who carry their training and their history and their sacrifice into rooms that have no idea what they are receiving, who do the work without the credit, and then, when they have been asked to set it down and become someone ordinary, they do that too, fully quietly, without the need for anyone to know what it took. They become nurses. They work the overnight shift. They remember exactly how to save a life when the moment arrives. Because some things you learn in places dark enough that the knowledge becomes part of your bones. And your bones don't forget even when everything else is asked to. Mara Sutton drove south into the morning. She was just a nurse. She had always been just a nurse, and anyone who had ever needed her in the dark knew exactly what that meant. If this story reached something in you, if you have ever believed that the quietest people in any room are often carrying something the rest of the room will never see, then you already understand why this channel exists. Subscribe to The Secret Nurse. Hit the bell, because the next story is already waiting, and the person at the center of it has been hiding in plain sight for longer than you'd think.